Welcome to the course. One of the great things about Excel is that you can use it to calculate all sorts of things, from doing basic math, finding the cost of monthly payments. You can even use a formula to tidy up a list of incorrectly capitalized names, and much more. In this course, we'll go from simple formulas to the more complex, starting with basic math. The next time you're working in Excel and need to get a number, you don't have to reach for a calculator or pencil and paper. Instead, use Excel. To do math in Excel, you create simple formulas. Every formula starts with an equal sign, and for basic math, you also use math operators. You know, a plus sign to add, minus sign to subtract, an asterisk to multiply, and a forward slash to divide. Here, I'll show you. I'll click in cell A1. I'll type my equal sign, and then I'll add two numbers, 93 plus 14. Press enter, and the result is 107. I'll subtract two numbers, equal 93 minus 14. Press enter, the result is 79. I'll multiply, equal 93 times 14. Press enter to get 1302. And finally, I'll divide, equal 93 forward slash 14, and press enter and get the result, which is 6.642857. That's quite a few numbers after the decimal point, and that's fine, but if you'd like to change it, you can. I'll click in the cell, move the cursor up to where it says number, and then to these two buttons. This one increases the numbers after the decimal point, and this one, which I'll use, decreases the numbers after the decimal point. If you'll keep your eye on cell A4, I'll click the button once, and we get one less number. I'll click it again, again, and again until I get to 6.64. By the way, if you ever wonder if there's a formula behind a number in Excel, just click in a cell, like this, and then look above the spreadsheet to the formula bar, and there's my formula, equals 93 plus 14. To get ready for the next section, I'm going to delete these numbers because they'd be kind of distracting. And next, I'll show you how to use more than one math operator in a formula. Formulas with one math operator are pretty easy to do, but there's more to think about when you use more than one operator in a formula. Excel calculates not just going from left to right, but by using the rules of operator order or precedence. These are the same rules were taught in school when we learned how to do math on our own. For example, if you wanted to write a formula so that Excel will add 4 plus 4 and multiply the result by 6, how would you write the formula? This way, equals 4 plus 4 times 6. Well, this won't do because multiplication is done before addition. So Excel would first multiply 4 times 6 to get 24, and then add 4 to 24 to get 28. So how would you write the formula? Well, you could do it in either of these two ways. Equals, parentheses, 4 plus 4 in parentheses times 6, or equals 6 times, parentheses, 4 plus 4 in parentheses. Both of these work because Excel calculates what's inside parentheses or brackets before doing anything else. In either of these two formulas, Excel will add 4 plus 4 to get 8, and then multiply 8 by 6 to get 48. Let's just take a second and go ahead and review the rules of operator order in case it's been a while since you've had to think about this, and you'd like to write basic formulas. Rule 1, as I just said, do things in brackets or parentheses first. Rule 2, exponents, roots, and powers come next. These are not covered in this course. Rule 3, multiply or divide, working from left to right. So after you take care of the first two rules, either multiply or divide depending on which operation comes first. So with this problem, equals 35 divided by 5 times 3. You divide 35 by 5 to get 7, since division comes first in the problem, and then multiply 7 by 3 to get 21. Rule 4, add or subtract working from left to right. Finally, after you've done everything else, you can add or subtract. So in this problem, equals 3 plus 6 times 2. you'd first multiply 6 times 2 to get 12, and then add 3 plus 12 to get 15. To help you remember the order of operator precedence, there are quite a few mnemonics, some of which you may still recall from school. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses first, followed by exponents, powers, and square roots, for example. Multiplication and division, working from left to right. And finally, addition and subtraction, again, working from left to right. And here's one more. BODMAS, brackets first, followed by orders, powers and square roots, division and multiplication, working from left to right, and finally addition and subtraction, working from left to right. Up next, cell references. In the last movie, I did math by typing numbers into formulas. Now I'll show you how to create formulas by using cell references. Then, when I change a value in a cell, you'll see Excel automatically update the formula result. You may already be familiar with cell references, but in case it's been a while since you've had to think about it, I'll do a very brief review. A spreadsheet is divided into columns, rows, and cells. Each column at the top of the spreadsheet has alphabetical headings, starting with A, B, C, and so on. The rows on the left have numerical headings, starting with 1, 2, 3, and so on. A cell is the space where one column and one row meet. The alphabetical headings on the columns and numerical headings on the rows tell you where you are in a spreadsheet when you click in a cell. For example, I'll click here in this cell. Do you notice that column F is highlighted and row 5 is highlighted, which means the cell reference or the cell address is cell F5. To verify that, I'll move the cursor up above the spreadsheet to the name box where it says F5. Just as important as cell references are to tell you where you are in a spreadsheet, they're also very important in Excel formulas. And I'll show you a simple example. In cell A1, I'm going to type 50, press enter, and then I'll type equals A1. Notice there's a little line around cell A1, which means it's being included in this formula. And then I'll press enter. And the contents of cell A2, which equals A1, is 50. If I change the number from 50 to 100, if you watch cell A2 as I press enter, cell A2 changes to 100 because it equals A1. And another example, if I type equals A1 plus A2 and press enter, the result is 200. Then if I change 100 to 150 and press enter, if you'll take a look at cell A2 and A3, cell A2 changes to 150, same as cell A1, and the total here, since it's the total of both A1 and A2, equals 300. In another example, I want to divide one number by another and then add the result to another number. I'll just go ahead and type the numbers in. 980 is what I want to divide by 35, and to the result I'll add 43. Now I'll type the formula equals, and previously I typed in the cell address, but this time I'm just going to click on the cell, and there's a marquee around it, and D1 is in the cell. I want to divide D1 by the contents of cell D2, so click that cell, and that puts D2 into the formula, and then I want to add to that result 43, and so click cell D3 and that puts it into the formula. Then I'll press enter and get a result of 71. Now because I use cell references in the formula instead of numbers, I can update these numbers and see the formula automatically result. So for example, I'll change 980 to 1020, and as I press enter, keep your eye on cell D4, and it changes from 71 to 72.14286. And I can change this number, say from 35 to 50, and press enter, and the result changes to 63.4. And I could keep changing those again and again, but my formula always remains the same, equals D1 divided by D2 plus D3. In a later section of the course, I'm going to show you about different kinds of cell references, but next I'll show you how to use a predefined formula called a function. What you see here is a list of names. These are salespeople, and these are the amounts that they sold during week 1 and week 2. And I'd like to get the total of their sales for week 1. It's really easy to get that total by using a pre-written formula called a function. I've got my cursor here in cell B7 at the bottom of the list. I'll move the cursor up to the ribbon to where it says editing, and then to this button, which is called the sum or the auto sum button, and I'll click the button. And I'll explain the different parts of the formula here. We've got a marquee that's going around all the cells that are included in the formula. And the formula is a little bit easier to see up here in the formula bar, so take a look at it here. It starts with an equal sign because it's a formula, then sum, the name of the function, and then a parentheses, B2 colon B6. The colon means that everything starting with B2 through B6 will be included in the formula, and then there's an ending parentheses. All I have to do is press enter, and there I've got my total, 8,426.96. Now, Excel entered that formula for me. I didn't have to do anything except click a button. But I can also use the sum function on my own, and I'll do that because I'd like to get the total sales for week 1, but excluding the sales that were made by Buchanan and by Leverling. So to do that, I'll type my equal sign, and I know the name of the function, which is sum. I'll go ahead and type it, and my beginning parentheses. I don't want Buchanan to be in the total, but I do want Suyama, so I'll click in that cell. And I also want Peacock, so I'll drag down, and you can see here in the formula that it says B3 colon B4 to signify that both of those cells will be in the formula. That's one part of the formula argument. I need to separate this part of the formula from the next argument, so I'll type a comma, and then I want the sales of Devolio. So I'll click in that cell, which is B6, and B6 is entered in the formula, and then I'll type my closing parentheses and press enter. So excluding Buchanan and Leverling, the total sales for week 1 are $7,013.90. And I'll show you one other function right now. In addition to doing formulas at the very bottom of a list of numbers, you can also do a formula to the side in the row. And in this case, I'd like to get the average amount of the sales for week 1 and week 2 for Buchanan. So I've clicked in cell D2 right next to those two numbers. I'll go back up to where it says editing again, and to the auto sum button. But this time I'll click on the arrow, and as you can see it says sum, and here's the average function. So I'll click that, and the marquee is around the two cells in the formula, B2 colon C2, and the formula says equals average, the function that we just used, and I'll press enter, and there's the average, $724.10, and the formula was done for me by Excel. Next up, we'll take a deeper look at cell references. I created a formula in cell B7 to get the total of all the numbers in column B. I'd also like to get the total of the numbers in column C. And to do that, I can create another formula, or I can copy the formula I already have to column C. To do that, I'll click in cell B7. I'll move the cursor until it becomes a black plus sign, depress the left mouse button, and drag to cell C7, release the mouse button, and there's my total for column C. I'll take a look at both formulas to see what happened when I copied the formula. Click in B7 and look up at the formula bar, and you can see that the cell references are B2 colon B6, which encompass all the numbers in column B. I'll click in cell C7 and look up at the formula bar, and you can see that B2 has become C2 and B6 has become C6. Now the formula encompasses all the numbers in column C. When I copied the formula from this cell to this cell, the cell references automatically changed to reflect the formula's new location. When you copy a formula and the cell references change, the cell reference is called a relative cell reference. Not that you have to know that term, but that's just what it's called. Before I go on to the next section, I also want to get the total for each salesperson for weeks 1 and 2. To do that, I'll click in D2 and I'll go up to Editing and click the AutoSum button and press Enter, and there's my total. And I'll move the cursor till it's a black plus sign and drag down, and now I've got the total for each person for their 2 weeks work. Now, by the way, drag and dropping a formula works great, but you should know that you can also copy and paste a formula from one location to the other. That comes in especially handy if you want to copy a formula from one cell to a cell that's not right next to it. I'll just give you an example. I'll delete this formula. I'll click here and right click and click copy. Then I'll click where I want the formula to go, and I'll right click, and I have some paste options, and this one is formulas, which I want since I'm pasting a formula. I'll click, and there's my total again for column C, and to get rid of this marquee around cell B7, I'll press escape. Next, you'll see a formula in which the cell reference does not change when it's copied from one cell to the other. Every 2 weeks, each salesperson gets a 3% commission for their 2 weeks worth of work. I'm going to create a formula in which I can calculate what each person's commission will be. I'll type my rate, it's 3%, into cell F2, and it could be in any cell, that's just the cell I happen to pick. And then I'll type my formula here, equals, and then I want to get Buchanan's total into the formula, and I want to multiply that times the commission rate. And here's the commission rate. I'll click there, and I'll press Enter, and the commission rate is 43.45. Now I'm going to copy the formula, and you might be surprised by the result. Copy it down, and look, everyone else is getting zeros. Well, that's obviously not right. They should get a commission. Let's take a look at the formula and see why this has happened. If I click in E2 for Buchanan's commission, we see D2 times F2. Well, that's perfectly fine. This is D2 and that's times F2. But if I click here and look up at the formula bar, it says D3 times F3. Well, there's nothing in cell F3, so that's why we've got a 0. And of course, since cell references change when they're copied, F2 here became F3 when it was copied down, and then if we look again, it became F4. Well, and this is an example where, as great as it is that cell references can automatically change, we don't want it to change. So what I'm going to do is show you how to make that happen. I'll delete this. Well, actually, I'll delete the entire formula and just start over again. I'll type my equal sign. I'll click here to get D2 in again, and do my multiplication sign. I'll click here to get the commission rate. But this time I'm going to change the cell reference from being a relative cell reference that will change when copied to an absolute cell reference that will always point to cell F2. And absolute cell references look different than relative, and you change it by pressing your F4 key. And now, this probably looks kind of strange, it does to me anyway. It says $F, $2, and that just means that this formula is always going to point to cell F2. By the way, if you forget the keyboard shortcut of F4, you can always type the dollar signs in yourself, and the dollar sign always goes before the column, so $F, and before the row, so $2. So I'll press Enter, and there's my total, same as before, but this time when I copy the formulas down, each person has their own sales commission. If I click in the cell here and look at it, we've got D3, and there's our absolute reference. It's pointing over here to cell F2. Click here, and again, the relative reference changed from D3 to D4, but that absolute reference still points to cell F2. Next, I'm going to show you another formula example where the cell references are kind of a combination of both relative and absolute. I want to build a table, and what the table will tell me is that based on how much someone sold, what their commission would be for those sales depending on what the commission rate is. To do this, I need to create a formula with cell references that are called mixed references, where part of the reference is absolute and part of the cell reference is relative. Now, I kind of had a hard time understanding this, but I eventually got it, and I hope I can make it a little bit easier for you. You generally would use a mixed cell reference in a table like this, either commission rates or say a tax rate table. I'll click here where I want to build my first formula. And what you have to ask yourself if you're building a table like this is, what do you want the formula to always point to be an absolute reference? Well, I always want to point to column B, where my sales rates are, and I always want the formula to point to row 2, where the commission rate is. So go ahead and type the formula, my equal sign. I'll click here to get 100,000 into the formula. Now I want to make column B into an absolute reference, so I'll press my F4 key, and that makes B3 an absolute reference, which is not what I want. I only want the column to be absolute. I'll press my F4 key again, and this time it's made its $3, which means that the row would be absolute, which isn't what I want. So I'll press F4 one last time, and I've got an absolute reference to column B, but a relative reference to row 3, which is what I want. The formula will always point to column B, but the relative part 3 will change as I copy down to say row 4 and row 5 and so on. Now I'll multiply times my sales commission, which I can't see right now. It's kind of obscured, so I'll just go ahead and type in C2. So I want to refer to row 2 all the time, so I'll press my F4 key, and everything's absolute. Don't want that. Press F4 again, and that's exactly what I want, which is a relative reference to column C, because I'll be copying to column D, E, and so on, but always pointing to row 2, the absolute reference. I'll press enter. We get $1,000 if we sell 100,000 and get a 1% commission. And I'll copy this into the next cells, and that all makes sense. If we get a 5% commission, we'd make 5,000. I'll select these because I want to copy the formula down all the way in the table. Release the mouse button, and there I've got my table. And if we click in any cell, say here in F10, if I sold 800,000 and happened to get a 4% commission, it'd be 32,000. And if we look up in the formula bar, we can see that we've got this absolute reference to column B, but we're in row 10 times. We happen to be in column F, but we're still pointing the formula to row 2. I click up here where I've sold 400,000 and get a 1% commission. It's 4,000. We look up here in the formula bar. We're pointing to column B. We happen to be on row 6 times. We happen to be in column C, and there's that absolute reference pointing to row 2. Next, you'll see some more functions. Excel has many functions, or predefined formulas, that you can use to calculate all sorts of things. Earlier in the course, I showed you how to use the sum function here in the editing group on the Home tab. Here's the auto sum button, and if you click the button, you can see the sum function and the average function. There's also a function to count numbers and to find the maximum or the minimum. But there are a lot more functions that you can use, and I'm going to click the Formulas tab. And here's a function library. And notice the auto sum button is also available here. And there are financial functions, logical, text, date and time, and so on. Quite a lot. Gives you an idea of some of the things you might be able to do with functions. If you know the name of a function, you could look for it in its library, but more importantly, if you don't know the name of the function, you can click this Insert Function button. And the function I'm going to look for, I'd like to calculate the payment on a copier that I'd buy. And the insert function box is open here, and I'm just going to type in here calculate payment, and then I'll click go. The first function in the list here is PMT, and it's described below the list of functions calculates the payment for a loan based on constant payments and a constant interest rate. That sounds like what I need, so I'll click OK. This opens the function arguments dialog, and this is where you're going to enter what's called the arguments for the formula. And for the PMT function, the three arguments that are required, they're in bold-faced here, are rate, NPER, and PV. And it's probably hard to know what on earth those are, but you'll find out in just a second. And these two, FV and type, they're not in boldface, and that means that they're not required. So I'll click here in the rate box, and underneath it says rate is the interest rate per period for the loan. For example, use 6% divided by 4 for quarterly payments at 6% APR. Well, the interest rate to purchase my copier is 3.5% divided by, since I'll be making monthly payments, 12. Then I'll move the insertion point here to NPER. And NPER is described as the total number of payments for the loan. And I'm going to pay it off over 3 years, so that's 36 payments over that period of time. And then put the insertion point here in PV, and PV is the present value, the total amount that a series of future payments is worth now. So that would be, the loan is $3,500, so I'll type that in, and then I'll click OK. And the result is $102.56 is what my monthly payment would be, and the payment is formatted in red with parentheses because that's the way financial functions are formatted. Next, I'll show you another way to enter the same function. If you know the name of a function, you don't need to use the Insert Function button. I'll use the PMT function again, but this time I'm going to calculate the monthly payments on a home mortgage. I'll click in an empty cell and type my equal sign, and then I'll type P for payment, and what happens is you see Formula Autocomplete. It offers me a list of functions that start with P, and here's PMT, and if I wasn't sure if that was the function I was looking for, I could just see its description here. Calculates the payments for a loan based on constant payments and a constant interest rate. That's what I'm looking for, and I could just continue to type the function, but I'll just double click it to get it in along with my opening parentheses. And the arguments are listed below. Now if I wasn't sure, didn't really remember what the arguments were, I could click here on PMT and get a help topic that would describe the arguments for me. Now the first argument is rate, which is my interest rate, and that's 5%, and I'll divide it by 12 because I'll be making 12 monthly payments. When you're typing this formula on your own, you need to separate the arguments yourself, and so I'll just type a comma to do that. Then NPER is the next argument. That's the number of payments over 30 years, and I'll type 30 for 30 years times 12 because I'll be making 12 monthly payments, and I'll type a comma to separate NPER from the next argument, PV, which is the present value, and that's the present value of the loan amount, which is $180,000. And if you'll notice, the last two arguments, FV and type, have square brackets around them, and that means that they're not required for the formula. And I'll enter my closing parentheses and press enter, and the result is that my monthly mortgage payment would be $966.28. Next, I'll show you a function that you can use to work with text. You aren't confined to using functions with just numbers. You can also use them to work with text. For example, here's a list of employee names, and they're very badly formatted. The capitalization is just all over the place, and I'd like to just have the first letter of each name capitalized with the rest of the letters in lowercase. I'll place my insertion point here in cell B2 where I'm going to want my formula next to Nancy's name. Then I'll search for the function by clicking Insert Function. In the Search for a Function list, I'll type proper names, and then I'll click Go, and I get this return. The first function in the list is called proper, and I look at its description. It converts a text string to proper case, the first letter in each word in uppercase, and all other letters to lowercase. That's what I want, so I'll click OK. It enters proper into the spreadsheet here, and the function arguments dialog box is telling me that the only argument is text. And I want to get Nancy's name into the formula, so I'm just going to click in cell A2. That puts it in the box, and I'll click OK. And there's Nancy's name gone from all capitals to just proper name capitalization. I want to copy the formula to repeat it. I'll just grab the formula and release the mouse button, and there's my list of properly capitalized names. Now I've got 2 columns and I only want 1. And you'll notice if I click here in Nancy's name and then look up at the formula bar, you can see that there's a formula behind the name, and I really don't want that. I want to click, say here, and see Andrew's name up in the formula bar, not a formula. So I'm going to copy the list of properly formatted names by selecting it, right-click and click Copy. Then I'll select the list with badly formatted names, right-click, and in the Paste Options box, there's an option here to just paste values, which is what I want. I don't want to paste the formulas. I'll click and I'll press Escape to get rid of the marquee around all these names in column B. Then if I click here and look in the formula bar, we can see Nancy's name without a formula. Over here you can see that there's still the formulas, and I'll just delete this column since I don't need it any longer. And now I'm left with just 1 column. And that's the end of the course.